A couple weeks ago, when Dan finished kind of preaching through, which, by the way, I thought Dan did such a good job, I finished up. Yeah, you go ahead and clap. Yeah. I'll tell him it wasn't very enthusiastic. He was finishing up the text, and he really did. He did a great job, but I was kind of caught at the very end with these ladies that were sitting staring at the cross. For me, as you guys know, my imagination always tends to wander. I tend to kind of wonder, what were they thinking about at that particular time? What were they feeling? What were their hopes and dreams? What were their desires? If you've ever walked with somebody through death, especially a tragic death before, and you've had to be with them as they breathe their last, you also know when they finally breathe their last, you're just exhausted. You're worn out, you're tired. As I was looking at these particular women, this was what was going through my head in so many different ways. The lostness with which they felt, probably the way in which they felt like everything probably was even out of control. Just that sense of, what are we going to do now? I think they still were hoping, right? I think when they were looking up the cross, there was that sense that they knew something was supposed to take place, but there was nothing that happened, and then he was dead. From what we know, at least two of these women stayed with him actually until he got buried, but they were just looking up at the tree. We also know in that particular time that the Jews came in, and anytime you see sometimes that word Jews, especially within the book of John, it's the religious leaders. It's the Sadducees, it's the Pharisees, the high priests. They came in and they said, look, it's almost Passover time. Let's get the bodies down. And so they broke the two legs of the criminals on either side of Jesus, but when they came to Jesus, they realized he wasn't dead, but just to make sure, they thrust the spear into his side. And we know that out came water and blood, meaning he was, in the words of Princess Bride, not mostly dead or kind of dead. He was dead. He was gone. And in that moment, even, I think there was a question, what are we going to do with his body? See, at this particular time, Peter's gone, right? We don't know where Peter is. He's broken. He's somewhere off trying to figure out what in the world just happened as he denied Jesus. James, gone. The rest of the disciples have fled away. Judas had chosen to take his life. I want to think John, probably grabbed Mary, Jesus' mom, and was taking her off to be comforted at that particular point. That's what I want to think. And yet here at the foot of Jesus are these women. And at this particular time, women, especially non-family women, didn't have an authority to do anything with this particular body. And so the question is, what's going to happen to the body? See, if nobody stepped forward and claimed that body, what would happen is they would take the body down, they would lay it out, and they would lay it out kind of for just nature to run its course. Coyotes, foxes, birds, time. And when all was said and done, when the bones were probably the only thing that was left, they would have taken it and they would have thrown it into a trash heap. And here are these ladies probably wondering, what are they going to do? That feeling of just wondering what's going to happen because everything just feels so out of control. Now, this is what makes what happens in Matthew, I think, so powerful. Because what we read, if you look down in verse 57, if you got your Bibles with you, if not, you can go get one in the back. But in verse 57, suddenly there's something that comes in that's going to answer the question, what's going to happen with Jesus' body? What's going to happen with this one that we love? There was an understanding, he's gone, he's no longer in that body, but what's going to happen to it? And then when it was evening, there's sometime between 3 and 6 o'clock, we know it's not yet evening time, it hadn't transferred over into the Passover. The Passover kind of happens a little bit before the sun goes down, and so it's still that particular Friday, but what is going to happen? And along we find out comes look at that, a rich man. Now, normally, right, when we see rich man within the Bible, right, the instant we think it's like, oh, this guy's no good. But this guy, he's different. His name's Joseph. He's from Arimathea. It's a mostly Jewish town. And he comes in, and look at what he decides to do. He went to Pilate, and look at that. He asked for the body. Now, one of the things that we know about him, just to kind of reverse it back, is he was this one who was a disciple of Jesus, but he wasn't just any disciple of Jesus. This guy was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was a member of the council. We find that out from Luke 23. He was a person that was a part of the kind of the ruling religious group at that particular time. He was a guy that it tells us he was a righteous man. He was a man that was looking for the return. He was looking for the kingdom of God. But we also find out he was a man that had not consented in any way to this kangaroo court that had just taken place to crucify Jesus. He didn't want anything to do with the decision. He didn't want anything to do with the action. He wanted out of it. But the other thing that we find out about him from John 19 is that he was this one who was a secret disciple. Didn't know about it. It says he was a secret disciple because he was fearful that they might find out that he was a disciple. In other words, he was sitting in the background, wasn't going along with the kangaroo court, but at this point, he hadn't come out yet to let people know that he was truly a follower of Jesus. And in this moment, when everything felt completely out of control, when nobody knew what was going to happen, along comes Joseph of Arimathea before Pilate. One of the things that I love in talking about him is he didn't just come for any reason. It says in the book of Mark, it says he gathered up his courage. No longer was he going to sit in the background. No longer was he going to be one that was a secret disciple of Jesus. And for all of us that have ever felt kind of like that secret disciple of Jesus, oftentimes there comes a time when the Spirit of God moves in the heart of the person of God, and suddenly they can't hold back anymore. But it seems so strange to me that this is the point he would have come out. Jesus is dead. Now, it'd be one thing, right, if Jesus had been risen from the dead, now I'm coming out because Jesus just came back from the dead. But why in the world? And there must have been something in him going, there's something still here. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger upon it yet. But that guy right there is worth it for me to come out and to let everybody know that I'm a disciple of Jesus. And not just in any old way. I'm going to go to Pilate himself so that everybody knows I'm the one that's going to be asking for the body of Jesus. And I love this. Here's those women sitting there wondering, what are we going to do with the body of Jesus? And I think at this point, potentially, they had no clue that Joseph of Arimathea, the rich man, the secret disciple, had come out. Now, on one end, when he shows up, it says in Mark 15, he comes before Pilate and he goes, hey, I want the body. And Pilate goes, why are you asking for the body? I don't think he's even dead yet. And so he sends somebody, he pulls the centurion in, right? The centurion walks in, and, again, is he kind of dead, mostly dead, all dead, dead? Like, what is he right now? Centurion looks at him and says, no, at this particular point, he's dead. And so Pilate, I love this, ordered the body to be given to Joseph. Joseph is out. Now, if it just finished right there, I'd still be like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's so cool, because in my head, I'm even wondering, that's Jesus, man. What is going to happen to Jesus? And here comes this guy, right? Everybody's feeling like everything's out of control. And here's this rich man. But what's so crazy about it is that he doesn't just come. He actually comes with another person. In John 19, we find out he comes with another guy named Nicodemus. Everybody remember Nicodemus? You go, It's like Bible trivia. Here we go. John 3, right? He's the guy that came to Jesus during the middle of the day so everybody could see. No. He came at night because, we got two secret disciples of Jesus. But it says in there, and I love how it is that Nicodemus brings along with himself 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes that he was going to use to be able to now put on the body of Jesus. In other words, we're going to bury him, not just this criminal, we're going to bury him as a king. And in this time also, I love it also because Joseph of Arimathea comes along with a shroud that he's going to put over the top of Jesus because they were going to give him, not putting his body out for the animals to get to him, not taking his bones and throwing it into a place like Gehenna. We're going to give him a burial that's customary to a Jewish man. See what I'm saying? They're not just kind of coming out, they're coming out. It says in there also that they went and they took the body. They didn't just take the body, but it says they took it down. What did that look like? Here's these two rich guys, man. If I'm a rich dude, I'm probably going like to my servants. It's like, hey, I don't want to touch the body. Why don't you go get the body, go get him down. Tell me when everything is done. But they didn't do that. They didn't kind of come out. Then they walked up to the cross, the two of them, with everything that they had. They then went up and they took Jesus off of that cross and they had his body. And the tomb isn't far away because we find out that it was in a garden that wasn't too far from the cross. It was a tomb in which they had cut it out. Joseph of Arimathea had literally just cut it out. Nobody had been in this particular tomb before. And Joseph said, that's the one we're going to take him to. And the imagery in my head of Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus carrying his body together in that short distance from the cross to the tomb just got etched in my head. What was that like? To see Nicodemus, to see Joseph of Arimathea right there, finally got enough courage just welled up within them. And now there they are with their precious Savior, the one that they had discipled under secretly. And the two of them in front of all of the Jewish world, right? Everybody would have seen at this particular point as they just carried Jesus from the cross to the tomb. We know that once they got to the tomb, we find that at Matthew 27, they took the body and they wrapped it in the clean linen shroud. They would have then put all of the aloe and all of the myrrh on top of the body to again, it's not so much it preserves as much as it just hides the stench as a body decomposes. They would have put the face cloth, they would have covered the face cloth with everything. And in my head, I'm just thinking, if they've carried him that far, if they've come out at that particular moment, they must have treated that body with such dignity and such respect. Think about that. What should have been a man that was sitting over somewhere while animals feasted on him as he waited to be thrown into a trash heap, there they are in that particular moment, tenderly caring for this body, for all to see, everyone in front of them. They are going to care for this one to whom they were a disciple in secret, and it is a secret no more. At some point, they picked up the body. They laid it in the tomb which he had just cut into the rock. It was brand new. They rolled a great stone in front of it. They would have done this to keep the grave robbers out. Look at those last two words. They went away. What are we going to do with the body? God's answer, I've got two men. We don't know anything else about them in history, but there they were, and they went away. Again, in my head, just the image of them walking must have been incredible. If you've ever watched somebody die, you know that tired after you're done? That exhaustion? That's what they were. But I think to them, it must have felt so out of control. What's going on? Now, the important part about this, though, that I want you to keep in mind is that they were able to, because we learned this within Luke 23, before the sun gets to the position it's supposed to be, they had finished their job. It was still Friday, and everybody just keep in mind now, day one. Day one. Now, the other thing that we find that I think is so interesting is in verse 61 where it says Mary Magdalene, and I feel so bad for this lady, the other Mary. What's your name? I'm the other Mary. I always feel so bad for her. Because like if I was like, Todd, from, wherever, New York, and then the other Todd, and it's me, I'm like, oh, I'm the other Todd? Why can't he be the other Todd, right? But one of the things that we learn about them is actually we find out in Mark 15, by the way, she has a name. Her name is Mary, and she's the mother of Joseph, but still, she's not just Mary. Oh, you get named according to your son, right? It's Joseph. That's kind of how they know him as. But the other part about it that we know with these women is that they were sitting there and they've been watching the whole time. While everyone else went away, where everyone else was going away at that particular moment, these women followed. The idea is they watched him take him down. They then watched him carry him, watched them prepare him, watched as they put him in the tomb, watched as he closed, and they would have watched him walk away. They would have seen everything. Not only do we know that, but these particular women were from Galilee. They had been with Jesus. I mean, Mary Magdalene knew Jesus, right? She understood who he was. She had touched him, seen him, interacted with him, experienced the grace of Jesus in extremely powerful ways. She knew who Jesus was, and so she's watching this whole thing and probably feeling again a little bit out of control. What's going on? That sense of lostness. And both those Marys, you know this, when they left to go back to be able to celebrate the Sabbath and prepare themselves, then to come back and bring those spices on Sunday, they could have told everybody, no, I watched it. I know Jesus. I watched this, those two guys, which were so shocking, came and got him down. Those two rich dudes that were part of the Sanhedrin came and got him. They brought him over. They treated his body with such dignity and respect. They put him inside a brand new tomb. We would have never thought that. There was a garden right next to it. But no, we watched our Savior Jesus. He went into that tomb. We watched him on day one go into that tomb. And then it says they left, and they went back to get ready for the Sabbath. Now again, I think the thing that's so crazy here is how out of control these people must have felt. That's how they felt. But this is where verse 62 is so interesting. It says the next day, that is the day after the day of preparation. In other words, keep this in mind. Day one, no, we saw him go into the tomb. We've been around him for almost his entire ministry. We've watched him. We've touched him. We've interacted with him. We've experienced his goodness and his grace. I watched him preach. I've seen all kinds of things. That's him. And along then comes almost a group of people that must have felt like the cat's meow. For those of you that are younger, they felt overly confident. See, in their mind, I can just see it, right? They're thinking to themselves, we have done it. Our whole goal at the beginning of it, that idiot that came riding in on the donkey, this guy that was all pretending like he was all that, a few small strings, a couple little lies, twisting things just a little bit, and he is dead. We did it. They must have felt so in control except for one thing. See, in Matthew 12, right, a group of them walked up to Jesus, and the Pharisees, they would have been, give us a sign. We'd like to see a sign. And on one end, Jesus is like, I'll give you a sign. He said, I'm not going to give you a sign until I give you the sign of Jonah. 3 days in the ground, and I'm coming back. We see it again in Matthew 16, we see it again in Matthew 20, but they knew within their head, they had an understanding that they needed to go to the chief priests, the chief priests and Pharisees needed to go before Pilate. They needed to get up in front of him because they had one last thing they needed to tie up. In order to stay in control, keep everything like we're supposed to, we got one thing left to do. So they came in front of him and they said, look at this, Sir, Lord. We remember how that imposter, see what I mean? This this cheap like knockoff of a Messiah. This particular guy, an imposter, said while he was still alive, after 3 days, I'm going to rise. We got to put a stop to that. He says, so here's what we want to do, verse 64. We want you to order the tomb to be made secure until the third day. We got to go down there and we got to make sure that nobody's playing with this. Why? Well, he says in there, lest his disciples go, steal him away, tell the people, he's risen from the dead. And they're like, look, and the last fraud will be worse than the first. We got to go down there and fix this. We got one thing left to fix. If we can just keep him in the grave for 4 days, we win. Done. Over. Fraud. Yay for us. Now in this moment, they didn't quite feel in control, but I can tell they were just waiting to know, what is Pilate going to do? Now if you remember right, Pilate doesn't really like these guys a whole lot. So what does he say to him? It says, you have a guard of soldiers. At that time, they would have had the temple guard. Pilate's sitting there going, no, I don't want any part of this, man. I've done my part. You all tried to suck me into this, tried to pretend like I don't believe Caesar's Lord. I believe Caesar's Lord. I did what I was supposed to do. I did everything. I want out. In other words, Pilate's feeling like I am now in control. I got rid of these little pesky little religious idiots, and now I pushed them aside. I feel great. Get your own soldiers, losers. But I love what he says here. Go make it as secure as you can. The word there, what it literally means is make certain that it's as secure as you know how to. Go make sure at the end of the day, because I think it also, Pilate's going, yeah, this could be another headache if they steal the body. Now I got to get entered back into it. So you need to make sure that this thing is as secure as it possibly can be. So they went to the tomb. They secured it. To secure it meant they would have made sure that he was in there. I think there would have been a rolling back of the stone. I think everybody would have sat there. They would have looked. It looks like a dead body. Is it Jesus? Yes, it's Jesus. We can tell the different realities of it. This is Jesus. Now, they closed the tomb back up. They put a seal on it. It would have been a tiny amount of wax, kind of like the little stickers that go around like the gas pumps, right? If you see those things broken, they like, don't use this. It could be a scam, right? If seal's broken, bad thing. Well, if the seal was broken on these tombs, to break that was to say, Rome, we disregard you. You don't matter, so you don't mess with this. That seal was put there. You don't play with this. You play with this seal. You play with Rome. Everybody would have known that. But also, they set guards. Now, how did all they feel? I think Pilate's sitting there going, yes, finally, I'm in control again. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, the high priest, they're like, yes, we're in control again. Everything is good. Really? Really? That group of people that were the disciples felt like everything was out of control. But what I want to show you here in just a second is that while it may have felt out of control, it was completely in control. And those group of people that thought they were under control, let me just tell you this, they were under control of nothing. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, one of my favorite parts of this passage, if you look in John 19, and I won't go there, I'll just kind of tell you the story of it. But in John 19, if you remember right, there were two different things that happened. One is they broke the two legs of the guys on either side of him, and they also stabbed Jesus in the side. Now, each of those are a prophecy that's fulfilled. Psalm 34 said the bones aren't going to be broken. That's not going to happen. So when they came to Jesus going to break the legs, he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs, but they still did jab a spear into his side. And in jabbing the spear into his side, evidencing that he was dead, that was a fulfillment of Zechariah 12:10. Now, I don't think those soldiers were thinking, hey, here's what we need to do. So the other day, I was reading Psalm 34, okay? Oh, really? I was reading Psalm 12. Yeah, it's so in order to do this correctly, we need to break the two legs of the other guys, because, again, I was reading Psalm 34, and then we need to stab Jesus because that's the way we need to do it. They weren't even thinking about that. But isn't it crazy in the midst of all of their evil, in the midst of all the choices they have going on, God, hundreds of years before, had just been orchestrating the whole thing. I don't think Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus were thinking when they went to go get the body from Pilate. They were thinking, you know what, the other day, so check it out. I was reading Psalm 53. By the time we get to Psalm 53:9, it talks about the fact that this one who could be the suffering servant one is supposed to be put in a grave with other wicked people, but he's not going to. He's going to land in the grave of actually a rich man, and so here's what we need to do. They weren't saying that. But here's God superintending over evil men and superintending over righteous men, carrying it out. Who was in control? Was Nicodemus in control? Was Joseph of Arimathea in control? Were the religious leaders? Was Pilate in control? God was in absolute control. They were making decisions. They had volition. They were doing what they were doing, but this is how incredible our God is. Despite that, you can't thwart his purposes and plans. See, there were some pretty crazy miracles in Jesus' life, weren't there? That whole walking on water, telling wind to stop, raising people from the dead. Okay, I have not done that before. But of all the miracles of God is the miracle of him superintending all things, moving all things towards his purpose. All the while, evil people, righteous people are making decisions. No one can stop his will. That's our God. Another one. Day one. We figured that one out in the grave before day one is over. Day one. Day two, they made sure that he was really, really dead. And next week, you know what we're going to learn? He doesn't stay in the grave, just so you know. Day three, he comes out, but I didn't tell you. Somebody else told you, okay? 3 days. Jesus promised, and what? He did it. Do you think, honestly, that the Pharisees, the religious leaders at that time, the high priest, Pilate, were sitting there going, hey, here's the deal. Okay, we need to verify on day 2 that he's really, really dead so that when he does come back to life, we're able to validate that Jesus really was dead and he rose again on the 3rd day. They weren't even thinking that. But here's God superintending all things, moving everything towards his purpose. The word that theologians oftentimes use is this word providence, and I'm not talking about the capital of Rhode Island. Providence. It's an aspect of his sovereignty. You won't find it in the Bible. In other words, you won't go in there and go, I'd like to look up providence within the Bible. You won't find the word there. It's kind of like the word Trinity. Trinity, you will look it up all you want. You're not going to find it in the Bible. But let me tell you something. The Trinity is in the Bible. You can look up providence. You may not find the word, but let me tell you this. Providence is in the Bible. Providence is the way by which God oversees all things so that everything moves to display his glory and provide, that's the word providence, to provide for those that are his. It's the way in which he was the one that manages history in the direction it's supposed to go. Providence. Providence is the moment in Genesis 3 when humanity fell and everything might have felt out of control, but it wasn't out of control because one day there would be a serpent that would come along that would strike the heel of the eventual seed of this woman, but that seed that was going to crush his head, providence. It's the providence of Abraham and Sarah that never thought that they were going to be able to get pregnant, but you can't tell God what he's going to do. God intended to have a seed that was going to eventually get to Jesus. Providence. Joseph, right? Who would have ever picked him to be the prime minister of Egypt? His brothers sell that punk into slavery, right? He goes off, messes it up, does the righteous, faithful thing, but yet gets thrown in jail. He meets, the baker and the candlestick maker and all those other people in jail. Ends up giving some prophecies. Next thing you know, he's the prime minister of Egypt. I didn't have that on my bingo card. Providence. And even when he is standing before his brothers one day, right, and his brothers must have been going, okay, I didn't have that on my bingo card either, right? I mean, they would have never thought that. And he looks down at him and goes, I know you meant this for evil. I know that concoction that you were putting together that was so evil, I saw it. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for providence. It's Moses getting his people out. How in the world did they survive? You ever thought about it? They should have never survived. Why? Providence. All the way down through kings like Saul and David, Jeremiah the prophet, that man, he knew everything that was going to take place, and he's still wondering, God, how are you going to pull it off? How in the world are you going to pull it off? Providence. What about even Esther? You ever thought about that story? She goes off, she wins a beauty pageant, right? After she wins the beauty pageant, the prize is you get to marry the king. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But in providence, God arranged everything to get there, and she saved her people because she's queen. Providence. And all of that comes together. God is fashioning down all throughout time, and suddenly Matthew 1, this long-awaited one, shows up. And how did he get there? Providence. And in this moment, when they buried him in the ground, and one group of people felt like they were in sole control, but they weren't, and one group of people that felt like everything was so out of control, but it wasn't. They didn't realize it, but they'd encountered God. They encountered providence. So let me tie this together. Probably the most obvious one to just kind of talk about is this idea of an election coming up, right? Let me just say this to everybody. Please vote, right? Please vote. We need to vote. We need to be faithful like Joseph. We need to be faithful like Esther. We need to be involved in that. We need to be faithful from the standpoint is that when we go to vote, let's vote biblically. Let's vote the heart of God. Let's care for the least of these. Let's make sure that in no way do we create governments in which power now misses all the different ones that fall through the cracks. Let's seek to be faithful. Every one of those people that I mentioned all throughout that list, by the time we come to Jesus, they were faithful. It doesn't supersede God's providence. But let me tell you this. One side's going to win, right? We kind of had two parties. And one side is going to go, we're in control. All the powers of the universe belong to us. No, you're not. Whatever political party gets in control, just remind yourself, God brought them in. He can take them out. Another party's going to lose, and they're going to feel like, oh my gosh, everything is going to fall apart, right? And I would say to them, you didn't have any control in the first place, really. See, this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It doesn't mean suddenly now it's going to be like rainbows and puppy dogs, unicorns. Everything's going to be so happy and nice. That's not what it's saying. But what it is saying is when things get difficult, even when we have to go through suffering, even when we have to go through trials, even when we have to go through the valley of the shadow of death, don't you dare think that our God isn't sovereign in that moment. In that very moment is when we have to believe deep within our heart our God is sovereign. We have to think like Paul in 2 Corinthians 1, who was going through probably one of the most difficult moments in his life. He said, I felt like I was going to die. And I don't think it was like, a seventh grade boy going, I felt like I was going to die. It was a man. I felt like I was going to die. But that was to get me not to trust in myself, but to trust in the one who raises the dead. And that one, therefore, he will deliver me and he will deliver me again. God allows us to go through that difficulty, remind us we ain't in control. And I would even say this. There's this little parable about a guy that built up, his silos to store his grain. And he said, oh, now everything is cush and good. And God said to him, I will demand of your life tonight. You are not in control. We are to be faithful. Everybody hear me on that? We are to be faithful. But providence. And one of the difficult things about providence, there's all kinds of questions. I mean, John Piper wrote a book on this that's like 711 pages. And if you asked did I read it, no. It didn't have the picture version. I kept looking for that one and I couldn't find it. Meaning this message I'm giving you right now, don't leave and go, oh wow, I understand providence. Instantly say to yourself, Todd preached, so we probably don't get it all, okay? But one of the things that I found so helpful in thinking through providence was a series that was put together by R.C. Sproul called The Providence of God. You can get it if you want to take a picture right now with your phone. It's about 6 different kind of lectures. That's kind of what it is. But if you know anything about R.C. Sproul, it's not like lecture like you think boring. R.C. Sproul is so winsome in the way he pulls you together, and suddenly, next thing you know, it's like, oh, I just learned about providence, and I laughed, and I cried, and I did all those other things. He's now gone to be with Jesus, but I'm so thankful he was on our team. But if you want to go learn more about this idea of providence, I would highly encourage you to go to that website to learn about the providence of God. But I talked about the big things, but I want to finish with the small things. In Luke, it talks about the fact that God knows every hair on your head. Now, for me, right, that's getting to be less and less hair, so he doesn't have to count as hard anymore. Oh, man. If you laughed right now, a bear is going to eat you. If you don't know what I mean, that's you have to look it up online. But I just talked about the grand scheming, like nationalistic things. But he cares for us individually. You guys know I lost my dad kind of during the COVID stuff, and gosh, it was weird. I remember finally they said, he's going to pass away. So at that time you couldn't go visit anybody in the hospital. So they had a camera set up. And so I'm going to go watch a camera and say goodbye to my dad with the rest of my family saying goodbye. And I just had that feeling like this feels so out of control. What the world? We're saying all these things. We're crying. You know what families normally do. And all of a sudden the nurse out of nowhere goes, oh, just so you know, you guys have 1 more minute. So I just out of nowhere, because my brother's more spiritual than I am, I said, hey, dude, pray. My brother starts praying, and as he's praying, suddenly the screen goes black. I just sat there like, what the world? Providence. How is that providence? I learned something very valuable in that moment. I remember my wife hugging me. I remember her telling me to suck it up. No. She was praying over me. Just the goodness and greatness of Jesus. She was praying over me, loving me, crying with me. In that moment, I realized that man that passed away, he was my physical father. I love him. Providence, my true Father's in heaven. My Father's the King of the universe. My Father reigns and rules over all things. My Father is provident. And so while it hurt, and maybe some of you are going to offend you, I'm going to cuss here just a little bit, okay? It hurt like hell. It really did. In that moment, I learned not to trust in myself, not to trust in doctors, as thankful as I am for these smart guys, not to trust in chariots, not to trust in horses, but to trust in the God who is my daddy, who loves me and will never forsake me. Nothing can separate me from that love. Providence. And so Cornerstone. Providence. You got me? You with me? As things start getting crazy here in the next few weeks, because they're going to, you know it. Providence. Our God reigns and rules over all things, and all God's people said,